Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Stewarts Soundbites. So this week we've got a real treat because we've got Cara Smith, who's the head of our pro bono team at Stewarts, and we've got senior paralegal Emily Charlesworth today. And we're going to talk a little bit about problems, common problems that arise after serious injury, which kind of sounds a little bit vague, and in a way I suppose it is, but actually we see the same problems cropping up in the early days after people are catastrophically injured. I think it's fair to say the clients that we work with, no one ever expects to find themselves in this situation, and immediately they're kind of caught in the middle of 1,000 different thoughts about sorting out their house and finances, employment, all sorts of things. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, because I think it's important for us all to have an understanding of how bewildering and distressing those early days are, and what the main common themes are that come up again and again. But before we kind of dive into that, I wanted to ask a little bit, first of all, about the legal service that Stewarts provide. So Cara heads up the legal service at Stewarts. Can you just tell us what it's about, Cara?
Yeah, so at Stewarts, we provide a project which we call the Legal Service, which is a free legal advice service to anyone who's suffered serious injury or illness. And we've been running the service since 2004. So it's been running for a really long time, and it's grown. And we've now got a team of 5 people who work full-time on what we call our non-compensation issues. And I think in a minute we'll come on and talk about specifically what those issues are. But we get anywhere between sort of 300 and 400 new inquiries into our department every year, and dedicate thousands of hours to working on these non-compensation issues. But and like you said, the majority of the patients that we see in our department have been admitted into hospital unexpectedly, and they've not really made any sort of arrangements for their day-to-day ongoing commitments. So, for example, not many patients that we see will have executed an LPA. And on the other hand, a lot of patients that we see will be the only people who've got access to their bank accounts. So this can immediately cause, stress and anxiety, not just to the patient, but also the patient's family. And, the whole purpose of the service and why we're there is to try and shoulder some of that burden for the family and the patient. And relieve the stress so that the patient can focus on their recovery and the family can focus on the patient.
Yeah. And as you say, it's a huge number of hours that goes in to that, Cara. It is important that a lot of these people don't have claims, and they've been really unexpectedly sustained injury or illness. So it's a huge undertaking, and we see a huge range of issues, don't we? We see the same ones that come up again and again, and then we see other ones that kind of come out of the blue, and you've got to think on your feet and deal with, and that's what we've got our pro bono team for. And so let's deal with the most common issues then. What do we see? What are people really worried about in those early days? What are the most common things that come up?
Yeah, so definitely we have themes that develop, and when we go for our initial meetings, there are things that keep coming up. As you say, the things that arise at the acute stage can be very often very different to what they're concerned about longer term. If I'm thinking about an initial meeting that we'd go to, a typical initial meeting, I think I could probably summarize the main things we always speak about. So often what comes up first is finances. So we often get questions from patients or their family thinking, how are they going to pay their bills that month? Concerns about credit card debts or any large debts that might have big interest fees or late penalty fees that they seem to be at the forefront of their mind. And particularly mortgage and rent repayments, because obviously that's their property, and they're worried about post-injury when hopefully they will be able to go home, whether that will still be there. And I suppose that financial element ties in with employment concerns. So, what should I tell my employer? Am I going to be paid this month, and how long is that going to continue? Because we all know you get your employment contract at the start of the job, but obviously you don't often look at the intricate detail. Yeah, so then, just working out, and particularly people who are self-employed as well, we find that because they think, oh no, I haven't got an employer, is there anywhere I can turn, am I entitled to any sick pay? And then finally would be, I think insurance, you know, if people have a policy, they kind of thrust it at you and they want to know if they can claim under it. Obviously they're long, tricky documents. What will they be entitled to? Because they're hoping there'll be something there to supplement their income in that time. And often through work, they'll have some kind of scheme that they won't know about. So essentially, I guess you'd summarize it as, alongside the concerns with the injury and illness and things, it's just working out what's going to be like their income and outgoings over the next few months and how they're going to make that balance while they're in hospital, and kind of everything's thrown off kilter, I suppose.
Yeah. And do you find that the people that we deal with are huge, and their families are massively relieved that we take these things kind of out of their hands? Because as you say, I wouldn't have the first clue, you know, what an employment contract said about something so specific. You just don't know. And do you find that there's a huge sense of relief to people when you're able to say, these are the things that you need to be thinking about in addition to things that you're already thinking about, and these are things that we can help with?
I would definitely say there's a huge relief. You know, patients and family members are just so relieved to have someone there, because, you know, when their loved one is in hospital, they've got a doctor there who is essentially saving that patient's life. So having someone who they can then offload all their other worries to is a massive relief for them. And we often find that there'll be some patients and family members who at the initial stages will say, I'm worried about X, Y, and Z. But after the patient's made an initial recovery and they're doing quite well, then actually after that initial sort of hand-holding and maybe some signposting, they won't really need any more help. They'll be able to pick up the issues themselves and deal with them. The more serious the injuries the patient sustained, and, you know, the more complex their sort of legal and practical issues are, the more likely it is that that patient's probably going to need some longer ongoing hands-on sort of casework. And those patients and family members we can assist, you know, for a number of months and sometimes even running into years.
Yeah. And that's just what I was going to say. Actually, Stuart, our pro bono team are used to dealing with things in those initial stages, but also on a long term. It sounds like we're employing the Stewarts trumpet, but, you know, it is a really excellent service that is provided. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the practicalities then. How, Emily, you mentioned that these kind of common themes that come up again and again. How do we deal with those, you know, from a practical point of view?
Yeah, I think probably the best way to demonstrate it would be to look at someone we would meet. So someone, say, for example, a patient I've met recently. So like a younger woman who's had a fall and suffered a serious brain injury and has been taken into hospital. So she's not conscious, but say we'd meet the family within the first couple of weeks. If you were looking at the issues regarding the finance we spoke about, she might have the bank accounts just in her sole name, and also monthly mortgage repayments that she needs to keep up with. So what we would initially do with the family, which obviously can be difficult because how much information people share with their family about their financial situation does massively vary, but try and collect as much information as possible, you know, ask them if they've got any letters or anything like that they're concerned about. And then what we'd do is we'd suggest writing to the creditors and asking them if they'll put the account on hold in that initial period. So for example, with the mortgage, maybe asking for a mortgage holiday, or, you know, a freeze on a credit card or something like that. And then the next step would be looking to speak with their doctors or treating team and seeing if they can provide a few kind of just a few lines in a letter, just confirming admission, you know, she's fallen down, you know, had a severe brain injury. Because, you know, writing to banks where they get lots of letters without any authority from the client can be like banging your head against brick walls. So, you know, if we don't have the form of authority to kind of stop them just throwing GDPR at you, just getting that confirmation from the doctors, no, they can't speak for themselves, and we're just trying to let you know, and things like that. And then in terms of employment issues, often families will liaise with employers themselves. Often they'll speak to a next of kin, but, you know, reviewing that employment contract if they find it. I think with this recent patient, I think we luckily had a copy of the contract on PDF, and it turned out she was entitled to full pay for 3 months because she'd passed her probationary period. And then after that, we just let the family know she will still be entitled to statutory sick pay. And after that, if she's still not okay to go back to work, there'll be ESA. So kind of letting them know what that kind of income's looking so they can prepare for that. And then finally, actually, through kind of going on to the insurance point, which was through discussions with the employer, was finding out that she paid into some kind of healthcare scheme through her work. I think it was Bupa or something, and they have, you know, some kind of cash benefit for nights spent in hospital. So just writing to the insurer, getting that claim form, because the sooner you get it in, these things, you know, they take their time. So just getting it in as soon as possible, because then that's another possible kind of income source for her family to try and alleviate those worries about any, you know, the mortgage payments and things like that in the initial term. And then, you know, once that's happened, we can look with the family at longer term, depending on the recovery, whether we'll be getting some kind of legal authority in place for them. But often, you know, that, as Clara says, that might resolve itself as the patient makes the recovery. But those are kind of the initial steps I'd say we take most often when we go in through that initial meeting, and what we do in the following weeks.
I mean, it's a total minefield, isn't it? I mean, and we did a webinar before with pro bono, didn't we, with the team about welfare benefits, which in and of itself is just massive. And it feels like it should be so straightforward for these people, where they're, you know, find themselves in this awful situation. But it couldn't be more complex. And I think that's really helpful to kind of outline those initial steps, and knowing that support's available is so reassuring. So I wanted to ask, because I'm a huge fan of anyone that tunes in regularly knows I'm a huge fan of milking all of our speakers for what they're worth and asking for some top tips. So I wanted to ask whether you have any top tips in terms of meeting clients at an early stage and kind of rooting out those problems. I'm thinking, I suppose, more about case managers, rehab professionals that are, you know, dealing with clients in those early stages, you know, whether there's a compensation claim or not. What tips would you give for them?
So I would say, first of all, that information is key. So the more information that they can get about the circumstances, so information about insurance policies, bank accounts, details of the account numbers, and medical evidence. And so that medical evidence, you know, can just be a one-line letter from a hospital, or it could be something like a discharge report. But the more information you have, the better chance that you're going to be able to effectively communicate with whoever the third party is going to be. Another thing I would say is, if you don't ask, you don't get. So, you know, it might be that your client doesn't have the ability under the terms of their mortgage to transfer to an interest-only mortgage, or they might not be able to take a payment holiday. But you never know. You can only ask, and you can only plead, and you can only provide them with the evidence. And it might be that the bank or whoever it is will provide you with that period of leniency. And then I think my last top tip would probably be just to really make sure you check all your insurance policies and all your documentation. So, for example, we had a client who he'd had a fall, and he had a spinal cord injury. And we met with his family and said, you know, make sure that you check all of his insurance policies, and, you know, if you want, we'll look at them for you. Very happy to do so. So that weekend, his sons went up into the loft and they dug through his paperwork, and they brought in all their insurance policies. And they had this policy that they'd been paying for a good 20, 30 years, that they'd just completely forgotten about. And it was actually, you know, a huge policy that paid for £200,000, which was a huge source of funding for them. And, you know, had we not said to them, you know, make sure you check all your policies, they might not have ever found it.
Yeah.
That's my top tips. I don't know if Emily's got some as well.
I think I'll just add one, which is just about kind of use of language and kind of keywords and things like that, like terms such as vulnerable and life-changing injury, and really making sure you do use that when you are writing on behalf of the client, because, as I said, banks get so much correspondence, so many letters, and they often do have a designated specialist support team or a team that is there to deal with those kind of needs. But sometimes, you know, the letter can go into the void and you can spend ages trying to get to that point. So just really, I guess, just hammering home the seriousness, conveying the seriousness of the injury, to make sure that they're getting the right support from a bank or whoever, because they can actually be quite helpful when you get to the specialist support team, but it's just about getting there. So I think, you know, medical evidence and any supporting letters and writing for them, it's just including that kind of language.
I was just going to add, Emma, that there is also, you know, lots of resources out there. So obviously we all know that Citizens Advice is an amazing resource. There's also a website that's called Turn to Us, which if you input your details, it'll provide you with details of what benefits you would be able to make a claim for, which is really helpful.
Yeah.
There's a really good debt charity called Step Change. They're fantastic. And then also for sort of housing related worries and queries, the Shelter's website is excellent. So there is lots and lots of resources out there.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, maybe I'll get in trouble, maybe I'll get in trouble with you later, Cara. But if anybody has any questions or any queries, and they've got somebody that you know, has problems in the areas that we've touched upon, or thinks that they would benefit from some input from us, please give us a shout, let us know if we can help, and we'll do our very best, of course, to help in any way we can. Thank you both ever so much for your time and for all of that really helpful information. And thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you, bye bye.